Hello and welcome to another episode of A Junior, a Senior and I. I'm extremely pleased to have with me today both Javier and George to discuss domain-driven design. But before we do so, let's meet our guests. Javier, could you introduce yourself in 3 sentences or less, please?
Hi, so I'm Jav. I've been working in the industry for something like 20 years. I started in computer software around 7, doing stuff that I shouldn't be doing to a 286 computer by the time, and living almost all my freaking weekends with the support team in my mom's company. Very funny time for me. And I worked something like a little bit less than 15 years between Canada and the US before coming back to France and trying to adapt of what I could achieve, how I can work in North America to what I can do, what kind of impact I can have in Europe on overall.
Cool. Thank you. And what about you, George?
I'm George, long-time listener. Love the show, Pablo. Just impressed with the energy, like your hello, like just switching like that is impressive. I'm a developer for over 8 years, so I'm clearly the junior here. And good junior for life. At the moment, working at a company called Nodal View that does enhanced images for real estate pictures and videos and everything that real estate agents might need.
Cool. I guess the first question is the most obvious. What is domain-driven design? Whomever of you wants to take out the first question.
So it doesn't bother. I could rather say, how do you interpret the very basic definition of it? Because there is the paradigm that's basically around, let's have an ubiquitous language and stop creating communication barriers between business and development. And then you have the other part, the decorum, the artifacts, the dogma, the bullshit. And that's more implementation details that you raise to that is how it's done because reasons. And that's very different. So, and people tend to either have a pretty kind of paradigm view or a pretty detailed decorum view. What do you think, George?
I thought that we would have some debate here because I heard about it a lot. And so I thought I've seen the book Domain-Driven Design, which is just like too thick for me to begin with. Went with the distilled book, read it, and thought that it was overtly complicated. It sounded like something that a consultant is trying to sell to management for management to justify their time and their budget. And I don't totally agree. That is just, it'd be nice that tech people and business people have a common understanding. I wasn't sure then DDD, and as you said, all that is around it, all the wording and the strategies are just the way to go.
I see that you both agreed that there is a grain of insight inside of the idea of domain-driven design, but there is a lot of artifact around it that might be unnecessary. If we try to distill it, what's positive about domain-driven design? What are the useful parts?
For me, at least, I can tell you. First, it's nothing new. It's like the first time I started my career doing TDD. And it happened that when I started my career doing XP, I used to pair program with an old software engineer. By old, like, it was like 64. Okay? Like, he has to do electric stuff to debug computers. That's kind of old. And for him, was nothing new to that. It's just like, how can we package it in an easier way to new generations? And there is a big difference when you talk with, having talked with Evans, the guy who coined the term, what is very useful, and I have used it with all the artifacts and everything, it's in big corporations, big organizations. For example, we deploy that in some business units of JP Morgan. Now you have 400 people that are creating something that must be coherent. So, yeah, being a little bit crazy, doing your own stuff, now you're breaking production. And if you break production, at least in this complex stuff, it could cost something like 50 millions, perhaps to 100 millions if you really fuck it up and hours of denial of service. That's a big no. That's a hell no. So having this kind of structure, very rigid stuff, it's very interesting. But that also means that you need to have a real high level of maturity around business understanding. And I think, like, for me, that's the main problem with the whole, as you say, George, consulting bullshit. That not, it's a product per se. We have to train people. We have to sell training. So everyone should be doing DDD. That's stupid. That's like saying you need some freaking 500 truck to go buy to your supermarket. If you are a big business, fuck yeah. If you are living by yourself, what the fuck? I think that's the main problem. So, and I have seen that. And when you mingle that with the dogmatic way we have, because we all do that, we all have this kind of way of saying, like, Mac developers are really software programming. It's Mac. Come on. Like, front developers, is that really software engineering? Isn't it more like integration? I have friends that do CMOS development. And they're like, you do servers. Your problems are on milliseconds. Our problems is in machine time. Nanoseconds problem. You don't have problems. What are you talking about? Like, you don't even know how to handle your freaking memory. That's not software engineering. You're just luckily doing some coding and whatever. But I really think that around that, there is a medium where it's very interesting. Having working startups where you will have this double language, where clients doesn't mean the same thing sometimes for business and not for the tech team. Sometimes inside the tech teams, each team can have a different definition of a client. And now, how do we talk about that? How do we engage to define something together? If when I say client, you think of something that I'm thinking is, we ain't on think on that. But that's what we used to do even before that. We used to define what we're doing, being clear. That's normally the basic.
Yeah, but it's the basic, but in a sense, most times we miss the most obvious, right? If a book like or a concept like DDD and in this specifically the ubiquitous language needed to be written, part of it is I'm sure, okay, I'm gonna create this book, I'm gonna sell trainings, I'm gonna be rich, maybe, without wanting to disparage anyone. But on the other hand, if the concept resonated, was that there was a problem with this double meaning of the word client, right?
Oh yeah, most definitely. But the problem is not that we don't know how to deal with that. We haven't created something to deal with that. It's just that we are growing way too fast. Basic example, when I started in my company, you needed to do 2 years of pair programming.
To understand the product.
Now, to be able to touch the freaking code base. Okay, because before, like, are you really professional? Like, come on. So now you had to do that. You go through that. So you had to follow, and you will be the pilot, or you will be coding, and the other guy will be feeding you not how to code that, but why is the whole freaking application this way? Okay, because that's the thing. What you need to learn when you start is just imitate. You need to know how can I at this behavior. But to go further, now you have to understand why did it has to be that way. You have to assimilate not the decorum, but the paradigm behind that. Why do we do it that way? So that's important. What kind of question did you ask? Why? For what? What's the trade-off? Which is the bad thing that I would rather have, And even people that started something like 5 years, 6 years after me, it was very difficult to do that. When I was running my overall service, we couldn't do that for all the juniors. We couldn't because we were growing way too fast. 2 years wasn't possible. So we needed to target very specific profiles to say, we're going to bet on this one. We're going to train this one, hoping.
Yeah, 2 years is a long time to invest on a junior.
Exactly. In Europe or in bad companies in the US, people stay 2 years. So why are you going to invest in them if they ain't going to stay? But that's why I think and in startups, it's way worse because startups took the Nintendo way of external growth around intellectual capital. We don't grow people. We buy people out. We go check senior profile and say, hey, I'm going to pay you way more. That was when I started my career. Now, not sure it's the same, but when I started my career, that was the way. We're going to pay you way more. Come work with us. But internal growth, that wasn't the idea. That wasn't the point. The point was being fast. So that works very well when you still have a very large pool of seniors. But when you don't have seniors no more, how do you do that? So explaining, but that's why having this idea of we need to standardize that and define that. And again, I think the main thing that's really lost in translation is that for a lot of people, domain-driven development is a software engineering practice. That's why I really dislike decorum. And I totally, utterly, profoundly disagree with that. It's a business practice.
Okay.
Because it's not your developers that need to understand how business works. It's your whole company needs to have an understanding how the whole business works. Not lost in details, but on the whole, on the important part. Details doesn't matter. How did you implement your serialization inside your database? Who gives a fuck? That's a implementation detail. Doesn't matter. But how did you structure? What are the kind of trade-offs that you did? Yeah, that's important because that will have limitations. That will have cost. That's going to create sometimes very big side effects. But we created that way of thinking. It's a software engineering practice. It's kind of system design, but it's not. Because most of the time you ain't doing a lot of architecture. Today I don't use that. I use something more related to event storming with big marker description. But it's the same idea. Inside, when I do that, I have just the tech leads. Most of the people inside are sales people, product people, designers, because they know the client, they know the business. You don't. So it cannot be driven by software engineering. It cannot. But we say, at least that's what a lot of people took it. As software engineers, we are going to make it right. Sure. Sure. You by yourself, you can change the way business thinks. Yeah. Good luck with that.
Just playing the devil's advocate. Like that, we software engineers did change a little bit the rhythm of business with something like agile development.
Yeah, but here's the thing. When I started with extreme programming. Okay. Do you know where extreme programming put project managers or today product managers? Do you know where they fit inside this architecture?
No.
Not in the company. That's where they fit. Yeah, because they do what's called clerical work. Ain't no add value.
Yeah.
That's for Toyota production system. That's for Moody. That's waste and useless waste. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter. Who gives a fuck? Okay, someone has to write down reports. Yeah, sure. But there's no value on that. So we don't do that. That's why when I started, I had to talk with owners. That's why the term product owner. I own this freaking thing. I can decide by myself. Oh, perhaps we have 3 or 5 people, but we have the power to decide. Yes, it is this way. Project manager, they cannot decide. They don't know. They are just a way how agile consulting was pushed to sell to companies that shouldn't be doing agile most of the time. So normally you want their business because business know the business. They know who they're selling to and why people are buying. And that's information we want.
Yeah.
Why do you need someone in the middle to translate? I ain't stupid. I'm pretty good, I could say, in business and business strategy. And I think like every freaking good engineer can do that because that's system. And a good software engineer has a systemic view. We don't need someone in the middle, but we have. And that's come Evan's book. How did I handle that? Having people in the middle that mistranslate what I do. That's the thing. So, and for his way was saying, okay, so we created this bounded. Okay. If you go below, normally that's the actual definition of object-oriented object programmation, you know? that's the base normally. Okay. But we did the same thing with that than we did with OO. We had objects, but now most people think that class-driven development is object-oriented, which is not. It's very now that the guy that coined the term thinks that Erlang, a functional language, is the only one that is the purest for him. Pretty crazy, you know? Like saying that something that's really not object-oriented for us, it's the go-to for the guy who thought about the method. That's what I'm saying. So how do we handle that? How do we handle that today? And the more we go, the more that happens. We stopped having big engineers that had a very broad view of business, people that can be replaced, the people that are interchangeable. You don't know him. You have 4 teams of implementation, 10% goes out, doesn't matter. You put 10% more in, mem throughput. If you have to replace seniors, now you have to train them, they have to understand. Now you're paying for a year before they're really giving the whole throughput they can. I think that both of you know that a year in a startup, that's a millennia for a normal company. You know? So that's the thing. So yeah, we need to create that. Normally what we did, we used to call that the bounded domains, all that. We had coherent classes or coherence clusters. We have this kind of thing that we used to do with use cases, very specific use cases. Way too more detailed, way too detailed, in my opinion, and way too early. Again, in my opinion. But we used to have that. But we shifted that. And while we were shifting in this 4 years, a lot of companies that, again, didn't have a lot of seniors, really seasoned programmers, they throw every bad process with every good process. And now we don't have specs. We have a user story map. But that's not the point. And for the ubiquitous language, it's the same thing. If you don't understand your product, how are you coding your product? And that's what we used to say before. But now, you don't have time to think. You cannot think. When I started my career, I was smacked, but literally physically abused, because all times. Every time I started to code right away. The guy that was coding with me was telling me, where you coding? Where you going? You don't know where you're going and you're already walking. The fuck? Map it, plan it, understand. What's the step? What's your goal? Where you going? Do you want to validate something? Where is your blocker? Where is your critical path? Perhaps thinking is a little better. It was not the most cool way to teach people, but that's how they will be schooled, let's say that way. So we lost a big part of that. And again, in big companies, and most companies at the time were bigger companies, it's very, very important. Because again, in a big company, even in a middle-sized company, if you have 600 people working in the company, what happens if your misunderstanding doesn't allow 500 people to work? That's a shit ton of money.
Yeah. Go fast and break things. The breaking things is just complexity allows for breaking things just to break the whole system.
Exactly.
Sure. Okay, so is DDD the answer to the fragility of complexity?
I would say the ideal, whatever the way you implement it, it's very important. Having a clear definition of what business terms mean. Okay? Because here is the thing. For example, is it really important to differentiate between a value and an entity for some stuff when you are going fast? Does it? Not always. Because here's the thing, in value is merely in some kind of immutable value. But that doesn't mean it's unchangeable. It can change. It won't change every day, every second, so it's kind of immutable, but it can change. Does it make sense to put that in something that it's immutable on the overall system? I don't know. Sometimes yes, sometimes no, it doesn't. When I used to work in the industry and develop for some very fast trade server part, we had some constant value that were constant for something like 3 hours. They couldn't change. But every 3-4 hours, some stuff will happen and that will create a ripple effect that will change that value. So what do we do now? That's the thing. Again, we have the implementation detail is just a detail. And artifacts being aggregates, roots, they have a purpose. You shouldn't bend the purpose, not the implementation way. Sometimes people argue that's not the strategy design pattern. I was saying people arguing that on LinkedIn because I was bored. Who gives a fuck on the implementation? Design patterns, the main point of design pattern is not implementation. It's engaging with people, with your team. This is the way I think we should structure the whole thing. And now we have pretty little boxes that we all know. And we can talk about these boxes. That's super easy to understand. Instead of having a 2-hour explanation of what classes and what you have inside your classes and what they will do. Way faster, way better. You don't lose time with stupid details. You go to that value that you want. The data flow. That's what's important. So I think depending on where you are and what kind of maturity you have, you will need either to go very to the pure definition. You want to have an ubiquitous fucking language. The bigger you are, the more mature you are. Yeah, now you don't want people to changing entities and values and aggregates every freaking day. Because stuff gonna break. And you don't want that.
And for you, George, because your company is not huge, but it's not as small either, does the DDD as a quote unquote risk management in the sense that, okay, we create this ubiquitous language, we create this, when we need to fetch data, we go through a repository, this is the box we use, etc., etc. Does it make sense at your scale already?
Yes and no. So if it was innate and clear, yes. But the problem is the learning curve of everybody. So I've read the book last year, but it just still now it's just I don't remember almost a thing of it because it's really the condensed series of concepts and to apply. If we'd have to train everybody onto it, you would lose time that startups and scale up cannot afford yet. That's where I joined this idea that maybe it's a solution for big companies, but for small companies, I feel like it costs too much, and it's just also the solution is as we said, communication. And if you have clear communication and everybody is just trained on just seeking clarity, you don't need a net to be sure that clarity is there, especially if the person is just one message Slack away and you just go, hey, did you really mean this type of client when we talked about this? I was just I feel like communications, and a training in communication is maybe more valuable than a training in DDD's rituals and concepts.
I have one question for that. What do you think? Like, let's say, like, do you have the time for that? What's the output of the DDD training? You know, what's the end goal? Like, what did your people learn or understood at the end?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have no idea because, just as I said, about everything
No, but
about
in your
DDD
opinion.
that would be. So we could have maybe found ways to be consistent about documenting how the business works in a way, and in a way, I try to find a synonym for ubiquitous language, in a way that everybody agrees on the terms and can use the specific terms that are applicable as well to the tech side as well as at the business side.
Let's say you could have time for that on business and software developers. How much time do you think it would take to have a rough definition of the big stuff? You know, the really the critical, the must in your company.
In a way, we have it, but we have it intuitively. We don't have it.
Yeah, that's right. Define it. Defining meaning reading. You know, it's written. We validate it. It's not just because the thing is, when
and
it's
having
organic,
it as values and entities and domain objects and stuff like that.
No, because now you're talking about artifacts. I'm not talking about that because you told me like that value for you wasn't to have the artifacts. It was the business understanding.
Yeah, but the business understanding, we have it and it is documented in a way. So it's already there, but with little changes of definitions here and there. Just how much would it cost to make it consistent across the whole of business? I don't know that we wanted to make it consistent across all business because yeah, I don't know.
But let's say it. How much time do you think? Are we talking about some days, some weeks, some months?
Some days. I think that we're in a week maximum.
Right?
Yeah, not much. Huh?
Yeah. Is that a lot of investment?
Yes.
A couple of days? Like 4 days? You think it's too much?
No. 4 days is not too much. No, it's true. A week is too much. 4 days wouldn't be too much. It might be too much for the value that it provides. Because at the moment, it's not costly. Just to have communication issues is just the solution is such the alternative solution.
Okay. So here's my question. Do you have sometimes tickets like you deploy or you finish this feature, but stuff needs to be changed because behavior wasn't exactly what we wanted? Does it happen?
Yeah, of course.
Does it happen often?
No.
What does it mean, not happening often? For me, that's mean once a year. That's not often.
Yeah. No, we're a little bit more than once a year, probably.
Once a week, once a month?
No. It would be once a quarter.
Okay, and how much change? How does it cost to realign that?
It doesn't cost much because usually it's not a big big thing. And I don't think that an ubiquitous language was what created the issues. I don't think that the missing requirement or misunderstanding in the requirement is solved exactly by a ubiquitous language or any other concept brought by DDD.
Really?
Yes. I don't think that just the listing the requirement and the understanding of the requirements is a solution of...
I'm going to pick it up here, George, because for me, the promise of DDD when I read it, and I did skim over the constructs because, yes, they are interesting, but at the end of the day, unless I'm building a repository pattern, I don't really care that much. But the big promise that spoke to me more even than the ubiquitous language was this idea of having business and tech people talk with the boxes and arrows. And like, okay, so this is going to send a message there and we're going to put this policy here. And again, name the construct you want, but having a late fees policy can tell a story to the business person and he can say, oh no, we don't need a late fees policy. We actually need an interest policy here because whatever, right? So for me, the main advantage is to actually avoid those misunderstandings, which, from what I understand, in your case, are quite inexpensive and rare, which is great. In my case, less.
It's just like, can you really think about all the edge cases constantly just using, is ubiquitous language really the solution for every edge cases?
Every?
No, not every, but I mean, just edge cases, because in requirements, the issues always come from edge cases, and edge cases is a question of thinking and
But
preparing.
that's what I was saying. Every, no, most certainly. But without judging, and 100% you don't have every edge cases. Because startups don't tend to have a real quality definition with a lot of stupid process around that to have really every edge case. Okay? And most of the time, the way that this kind of loop, we understood it's one way, we develop it, we show it. It's not exactly why product had it in mind. It comes back, we change it, we go back. These kind of things, you tend to learn at a lot more than just once per initiative. Most of my experience, not saying in your company or whatever, just most in my experience, we used to say every time you push one ticket for modification, you need to put 2 tickets to fix. And most of the time, it's not technical fixing. It's stupid fixing, behavior or contract. That's why what's important is not the decorum. Again, what does it mean to have an ubiquitous language? Is to have one layer of communication that's crystal clear for everyone. It's not just a lexical definition. If not, we could have called that a lexic. Some taxonomy or whatever the fuck name crazy we want to put there. Because we like that too. But that's not the point. An ubiquitous language means when I tell you a word, you don't see just the word. You can understand the context, where it's come from, and the overall definition. That's an ubiquitous language. That's the thing. And that's very difficult to understand sometimes. Because details, and that's why I really loved when I encountered the first time what's called event storming. Because from the event storming, I get the same at value. But I don't get mingled in the decorum, technical, lingua, voodoo stuff, whatever. I don't get into that. I get a timeline. That's the job the guy wants to do. That's how we call the guy. That's why we call the action, the event that's going to change stuff. That's a life cycle of my data, of my product. And it's clear. And we have one line. We have a map now. We don't just have a graph. We have a map. There are directions.
And an understanding, a business understanding.
Exactly. So now we can create really an ubiquitous language. So when I say, because here is the thing, a transaction. Can you tell me what is a transaction?
Depends on context.
Yeah, right?
Mm-hmm.
But basically, if you have to write a lexical, a transaction is just an exchange of data, whatever, between two entities. That's a fucking transaction. But let's be clear, context, way more complicated. This transaction, yeah. What are we talking about? Like, are we talking about optimism? Are we talking about acid? Are we talking about what are we talking about? So the thing is, that's why I think it's very important. I think like that's the worst part, having Agile being dead. Now we have Agile trademark. We don't have Agile methods anymore. Having people understand the idea is heavy, it's complex. You have to think. And as humans, we don't like to think. Our brains try to trick us every time to stop thinking. We're stupid like that. But train people on decorum, fucking easy. Yeah, easy, time, whatever. More time, more money. Come on, bring it. So I think like we get lost on that because not only it's easy, we say, I know exactly how to do that now. We create a best practice in something where there is no best practice. We create this recipe that cannot fail, thus creating charlatanism, because it doesn't work that way. And we do that with almost every freaking process that had been fucked by Agile trademark. So that's why. Is TDD interesting? Yeah, having this level of understanding, written, validated. Because talking change. Written, versioned. Yeah, I tend to do that in RFCs within GitHub issues. Now that's where we have discussions to define exactly what we want. Being technical or business, doesn't matter. And it's versioned. I can go 3 years ago, what the fuck a transaction meant. And today, what does it mean? Is it useful every day? No. Is it sometimes life-saving? Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes where you are stuck, there is some weird stuff that has been added, and you have to do some archaeology. Yeah. Yeah, very good. But we get lost, again, in the decorum. So what I hate is decorum, not the add value. And the add value, I'm pretty sure, like as most companies, most people, you haven't really seen it.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, like when I code, we used to call that vibe coding because we were vibing together, but not because EA or whatever. But we were coding with the seniors I know. When we added a junior, he was frantic. It was crazy for him because we were telling, okay, so I'm creating a strategy with this contractor. It's a transaction. We are doing optimism there. And so much words that for us were so concrete. Optimism, for me, that's mean algorithm implementation. Very detailed, very specific. When I talk with them, a transaction is very specific what we mean about a transaction. And when they try to add something, every time they were beaten because that wasn't at all what we meant. And again, c'était la mode à l'époque. We aren't the most positive people to try to teach them that. Okay? You need to have the way to strike that. And if it's written, it's not just in my brain, way easier. Because people will leave. Decisions will blast. Information will decay, will rot. And at some point, someone will ask, why do we do that? And if it's just organic, the answer is, that's how we were trained to.
Someone did it 5 years ago and he left 3 years ago and we still don't know.
And if it's a software engineer, the answer could even be something like, are you stupid? Don't you understand what's so easy to understand that way? You know, I don't know if you follow, but on LinkedIn, there's this guy that I really like. And there was a shitstorm around Git. The guy was saying that Git is not good implementation for today, which is a fact. And everyone was saying, what you saying? Don't you fucking know? I think everyone have been fucked by Git on some merge stuff where our solution was copy paste outside, destroy your folder, pull back, copy paste. That's not the definition of a good technical product. That's it. So now we can have another kind of discussion. Why is it good? Why is it bad? But you cannot say it's the go-to, it's the best. No, it was better than the other one, having worked on CVS. Yeah, and we do that. We get on details and we get into this kind of balls to the wall kind of mindset. I will not be wrong. Because if I'm wrong, everything is wrong. So we go to die. We go to this kind of stuff. And a lot of people talking about DDD, it's either people like that or people selling training. And again, training, you want to train decorum. When I was doing consulting, that's what I was selling.
Isn't there something to be said about training on the concepts rather than the decorum? Like, training could be explaining what you just explained or what should be an ubiquitous language. Training could be, okay, this is how you could think of that thing, etc., etc.
On overall, I would say, yeah. Like, even into you, Pablo, like, do you feel like you have been well trained on every company you have gone on your business definition?
In most of the places I've been having to train myself. So saying no to that would imply I'm a bad teacher. So I'm gonna say yes.
But here's the thing: you haven't been trained.
No, I
then.
haven't been trained.
You had to learn.
Yeah.
Like we all had.
But I wouldn't have said no to training.
The thing is, I think like some stuff, and most of it are kind of systemic way to engage with a problem. When people explain it to you, it seems obvious, you know? But before that, there is no fucking way you could have found it by yourself. Even less when you're a junior and you haven't been beaten by life so many times that you had to stop and say, whoa, there's something wrong here. How could I stop that? You know? So, and around that, this kind of systemic way, why does it happen? Not what happened, but why does it happen? And DDD is a way to handle that. Why do we get all the time into this contest of definition, of not understanding each other? Why? Because we ain't stupid. Most of the time, they're more challenged, I would say, but sales ain't stupid, business ain't stupid. So why are we having sometimes these stupid discussions? Because I have had some very stupid discussions with business. And in both ways, okay? I have been very stupid, they have been very stupid. The problem is not me being stupid or he being stupid, it's the conversation being stupid. That has happened so many times when I was kind of junior, regular. So often. So, yeah, the question is, why does it happen? How can we stop that? And that's what George, I think, like, and I think it's very interesting because I have also heard that very often when he says it costs too much to try to define that. And living with it is not very costly. I'm not saying for your company because I don't know it, but most companies I have entered, this kind of, when people say that, it's like a battered woman. It's not so bad. It just happened once a week. He hasn't killed me yet. You know? Because we get into that. It's not a problem. It's part of the system. It's not a problem that we don't get it the first time. It's part of the system. So I know that I will have to take time for the first or second or third fuck up. It's part of the system. It's part of the flow. So it's not a problem.
No, it's a trade-off.
Exactly.
Like just, yeah.
Exactly. It's again, I think like both of you think that GitHub is a good product or Git is a good product. I use Git every fucking day. Do you say yourself every day, who the hell invented this freaking clusterfuck? No. But you'd say that once a year, perhaps when you're younger. You say that. But at one point, the stupidity of the process to not have the problems is so ingrained into you that you say it's not a problem. It's not a problem. You know, like I just have to walk 3 miles instead of 100 meters. That's not a problem. I just have to plan more time. That's it. And we do that with a lot. And that happens with communication and with definition. Because as it happens every day, we don't report it. We don't write it down. We don't say specifically, here we miss the definition. We don't do that. We will remember the big fucked up, but most of the time it's the small one that kill the efficiency of the company, the effectiveness of the company. It's the little ones, because little ones happens every day. Big ones happens for a year, you know, but it's ingrained into us. We are used to that, you know, like how many times have you heard business or non-technical people saying that technical people can't talk business? When you talk with business, it's ubiquitous. And how many times have you heard technical people saying business are so stupid? But it's a fact. It's not a problem. If it's not a problem, there's no need for a solution. So DDD was the idea of let's define the problem. And here is my solution. And as the guy was a software engineer, here is my very techie software object-oriented, for me, solution. But the problem stays, or can. So being trained in how to handle that, yeah, I think it's very important. And I really feel for younger developers that, again, I have had to do usability tests with users interviews when I was a junior. I had to do them.
That's not happening now, yeah.
Is it a waste? Maybe. But at the same time, well, we could ship good product, finished product, I would argue way faster with way less people. But I'm also not a guy that thinks that sometimes before was best.
I'm gonna start winding down the podcast because I'm looking now at the time and we're close to an hour. But first I would like to ask a question to both of you. And it's a bit for you, Jav, what should someone keep from DDD, which is a bit of a summary of what you said, basically?
I think the ideal that we want, that having not an ubiquitous language, because again, who use this kind of language every day, but have really a clear communication layer. We need something that is crystal clear, that doesn't leave some interpretation, because that's where fucked up happen. We need that crystal clear. Now, how you do that, there lies the beauty of software engineering. Not bad, not good answer, a lot of bad, but nothing good. Depend on your context.
Doesn't it always? And you, George, has this discussion changed the way you perceive DDD?
No.
Okay, that was that was fast. And with this humorous note, I'm officially calling the episode to a close. Thank you both very much for having joined me
Thank
today.
you, Pablo. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks.